I have tremendous respect for your intellectual independence, diversity of thought, and fascination with our human project writ large.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Of course, and for those who don't know you, Dr. Brovkin, you were born in the beautiful city of St. Petersburg in the former Soviet Union. You attended St. Petersburg University before immigrating to the US at 23. You studied Soviet history and you did your graduate work at Princeton, Georgetown, and Berkeley. And then finally, you worked as an associate professor of Soviet history at Harvard for several years. You have taught in the US, in Russia, and in Morocco, and you're currently retired and living in France.
Correct. That's right.
And you've most recently published a very impressive book called From Vladimir Lenin to Vladimir Putin, Russia in Search of Its Identity. I think your other books on Russian history include The Mensheviks After October, Behind the Front Lines of the Civil War, Dear Comrades, and Russia After Lenin.
Yes, correct.
Do I have them all?
Oh, there's one more which I published in Russia, in Russian,
Oh,
but
wow.
it doesn't appear in any of the book searches, and even the Russians have a hard time finding it. But it's called, in Russian, it's called The Great October Catastrophe. And
Interesting.
this is, unfortunately, it remained largely unknown. Maybe it's a matter of advertisement, maybe it's a matter of getting into the right lists. But at least this is those listeners who are in Russia or who have somebody in Russia. It can be bought in Russia, but not in the West. It's specifically for the Russian market in Russian language.
And so where can you buy it in Russia, Dr. Brovkin? Most of the major book.
No, it's available at the website that's called LitRes, Lit Lit.res, LitRes, which is
Okay.
something for literature. And another one, this is quite large. It's called Ozone, which is kind of like a
Oh, sure.
replica of
Amazon.
Amazon, but it's
Yeah.
ozon.ru, ozone.ru. And another one is called Wild Berries. For some reason, it's in English, wildberries.ru. So these are the websites that the Great October Catastrophe is available.
Okay, I will include links for that when we publish this interview, Dr. Brovkin. I hadn't heard of that last one, so I'll be sure to include that one as well.
Thank you.
So tell me, Dr. Brovkin, we have so much to talk about.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about the story of your life. I know you were born in the beautiful city of St. Petersburg. Tell me what captured your curiosity as a child.
Yes, that's right. This is one of your fascinating questions that very few people ask. But when I thought about how to answer this question to you, what I thought is most important is that I was going from one cultural milieu to another on a daily basis. And this is probably what prepared me for life now that I think of it. My Russian side of the family, the Brovkins, they were from very humble origins. My great grandfather was a peasant, and my grandmother was half literate. She was a real Russian peasant who couldn't read or write much, and her language was quite, uh, how to say, not quite literate. But at the same time, it is from her that I heard all kinds of Russian stories and the folklore, and she was very religious, and I am Russian Orthodox by religion. And I think I got a lot of it from her. And one thing that I thought, if somebody asked me what is it that is particularly Russian about this part of my family, I would say that it's resilience, putting up with any hardship that life can throw at you. They were the ones who lived through the Siege of Leningrad. They are the ones who know really what hunger is, what famine is, when people are dying from famine. In other words, resilience, putting up with anything, difficulties, and very Christian. Like she used to say, suffering is good. Suffering is what makes you appreciate life. These were the kind of people for whom to go to a restaurant was almost like a sin. See,
Yeah.
these are the kinds of people. And can you imagine from that kind of milieu? Uh, well, first of all, my father got out of it very quickly. He became a professor himself. So that shows you about the opportunities in this age, after the war in the 40s and 50s. But right after this, I would go to my Jewish side of the family, and they were totally and completely different. Absolute everything different. First of all, they also rose up through the Soviet times, and my grandfather on my mother's side was a professor, as my father too, but he was Jewish, and that means his whole outlook was fundamentally different. It was very from him I got this interest in politics. He followed politics all the time. He would watch TV, read Soviet newspapers. For example, I'll give you an example. He would say, I remember one day, Mikoyan, this is one of those ministers or Politburo who was under Stalin and under Khrushchev and under Brezhnev. So it was a very kind of like clever guy who could fit into anything. And so one day my grandfather said, Mikoyan is sitting not in the place where he usually does. And that meant something to him. This is called
Oh,
Kremlinology. He could interpret
yes.
what is being said and what it meant. And he always talked about it. And this is now, of course, they lived in a three-bedroom apartment, and he was a big professor. And the Russian side of the family, they had one room in a communal apartment where 12 people lived together. That's Russia of the 1950s. It was my grandmother and my uncle and his wife and his son and my aunt and my father, and they were all in one room in a big communal apartment. And you know what? Thinking back of the 50s, there were no TV, there was no TV, just the radio, but it was a happy atmosphere. They were singing songs and they were telling stories, and it was a good time and an amazing difference in the lifestyle and in attitudes and in wealth between the two sides of the family. I would go from one to another. That was amazing, yeah.
And what was it like? I hadn't realized that you came from a multi-faith background. What was it like growing up across two faiths or among two faiths?
Well, the Jewish faith was not really faith because they were communists and they didn't observe anything. But in the Soviet Union and generally in Europe and Eastern Europe, Jews is not a religion, it's a nationality. So the Jews kind of stick together as a social group, as a national group, just like Ukrainians would stick together, or the Kazakhs or Tatars or any other. So all the friends of my Jewish side of the family, they were what is called in Soviet times intelligentsia types. They were
Mm.
professors and lawyers and people who went to the theater and discussed new plays, and they subscribed to literary journals, and they would discuss what is new in literature. It was culturally a very different sort of setup. It was a very different one. And the time I'm describing, my father was just a student. So he still was very poor, living with his parents, and he became a professor much later. But at that time, he was 20 something. So intellectual side of things came from from the Jewish side, but the kind of a religiosity and determination and common life and values of families that came from the Russian side. And you know what? Nobody ever asked me anything like that. So this is the first time I'm sharing,
Yeah.
reminiscences of my early childhood.
Well, I think it's fascinating. Russia is a multi-ethnic country with different religions. And so I'm always interested to hear stories from people who've grown up in mixed households and
Yes.
what they thought of the world around them and faith. So tell me, you mentioned the Siege of Leningrad. Obviously, this is something that I think everyone from St. Petersburg holds very close to their hearts. What was your understanding of the siege growing up? How did it affect your family directly?
Yeah, it affected my family quite a lot, in a sense that the entire Brovkin family, including my father, he was 12, I think, at that time. They lived through it. So they told me what hunger was, and I a lot of times have tears in my eyes when I think about it. But it was a very hard time, and my mother was evacuated. She also was there as a child, but she was lucky in that, as a whole lot of other children, they were brought out. So she told me, how they were on the train, and then the bombs were flying, and this previous train was bombed, and the one after them was bombed, but theirs got through. So I tell you one example of the effect that these stories had on me. First of all, is respect for food. We never throw out food, ever.
Yeah,
And when I went to Georgetown, which is 1975, I saw students in Georgetown throwing pies at each other, and they thought it was funny. And I thought it was disgusting. I felt almost physically sick when I saw it, because I thought it's such disrespect for food. And there are so many people hungry. And today in Gaza, people are dying, children are dying. So I think respect for food is
sure.
very important. And that's what I got out of it. You asked me about my childhood. This is only one thing, but what's also important is that my grandfather, I got interested in politics very early on. And one of the reasons was that my grandfather, and this professor, he, I remember 1961, the 22nd Party Congress, and they talked about, Khrushchev talked about Stalin's crimes, and they were all talking about it and reading every word. And this is the first time I was 10, and I kept talking and thinking, I mean, my grandfather, about the Stalin era and the executions and arrests and so on. And that really sort of remained with me, that interest in politics. I think it was the influence of my grandfather, and the fact that the revelations sparked everlasting topic of discussion, the role of Stalin and the revolution, and what happened afterwards. So this is one of the experiences that had long consequences. Yes.
So, Dr. Brovkin, what was the prevailing attitude towards politics at that time, the time that sparked your interest? And I ask that because right now we live in this environment that I say where politics is associated with profound negativism. And if you were to ask a lot of people my age, the study of politics is sort of bleak and uninspiring. And was there more hope back then, or what was it about politics then that drew you to it?
Yeah, well, you see, I partly discussed some of those themes in my book, From Lenin to Putin, especially in the chapter on the 1960s, where I describe the cultural and political atmosphere in the Soviet Union in the 60s and 70s. And what's important about this atmosphere is that it was really a time of uh, searching of ideas.
Mm.
What is socialism? Where did it go wrong? Is it compatible with democracy? Could there be such a thing as democratic socialism? Why is there one party? Why couldn't there be others? Uh, well, it's only natural if we're supposedly the Republic of Soviets, which means workers and peasants' councils, and there's supposed to be democracy. Why couldn't it be somebody else, not just the Communist Party, who would also try to serve the people's interests better? So these are the kinds of ideas I grew up with. And then also about my formation in the early 60s, there was a kind of a reform movement which is known under the name Kosygin reforms. Kosygin was a prime minister. And my father, by that time, became an economist, and a very successful one. He actually made quite a career, and then served as a professor of economics in a higher party school. Higher party school is approximately, in its prestige, is like uh, London School of Economics
Mm.
or Harvard Business School, that kind. It's just about the best that there is. And so he was involved in developing the ideas that he called market socialism. This
Mm.
is approximately what the Chinese have done and the Soviets have failed. But the idea was to create market mechanisms within the socialist system, within the Communist Party rule. The Communist Party is fine, it's wise, they know what to do, blah, blah, blah. But that's what the ideas were. And I grew up with these ideas. See, this all had, profound effect on me to a point where when I was, I think, 17, just about the time I finished school, that I they had a serious consideration of where I live and what I do. And I became very anti-Soviet in the sense that I believed in democracy, I believed in socialism, I believed in free choice. And the more I saw Brezhnev type, idiots and imbeciles and bureaucrats corrupt, the more I rejected the system. And since I studied in the English school, which means I spoke pretty good English when I was, I don't know, 15 or so, because this was a high school that just about everything was in English. So I was very interested in the West and in the United States. And when I graduated from school, I went to the university. My major was English literature. So I studied a lot of English literature. I was interested in American literature. I read all kinds of American literature, from Faulkner to Steinbeck and everything. And and I really got to know American society. And at that time, which is not now, I really fell in love with the United States. I thought that this was like the place to be, because that's where there you have real democracy. This is where you have political parties and great culture and literature. I idealized the United States. It turned out to be not as rosy as I painted it to myself. But when I was 17, I rejected the Soviet Union and I embraced wholeheartedly the United States, and basically and France as well. I was French literature was my secondary. I really got to love France from the beginning. So finally, I decided that if a chance could present itself, I would leave. And then in 1973, President Nixon came to the Soviet Union, and the period of détente, of warming of relations started. And one of the things that he and Brezhnev signed was a permission for 50,000 Soviet Jews to leave the Soviet Union. And so in 1974, I applied, and I was rejected at first. But then by Jewish law, I'm Jewish because my mother is Jewish.
Mm.
By Russian law, I'm Russian because my father is Russian. So I could be anything. And so I wrote to friends in Israel that I wanted to come, and the only way to leave was through the visa to go to Israel.
I
And
see.
so, to my great surprise, I received an invitation from Israel, and I went to the visa office and I applied, and they said, fine, you can go. And so in January 1975, I left the Soviet Union with $160 in my pocket.
And what did your family think of all this? How was
My Russian family was very upset, and my father too. He was very upset because he thought it might have negative consequences for his career and for
I
his teaching, because he was a party member and of high standing. But it didn't. Nothing happened. It was okay. We spoke on the phone several times. My grandfather by that time died, so he didn't know anything about it. My mother welcomed it, and she actually came a year later. So she lived all her life in Florida. She died last year. So she did join me and did support me, and it worked
wow.
out fine.
And what was the sort of zeitgeist among young people your age at that time in terms of um, admiring the West, being inspired by these virtues of democracy and
Yes.
liberalism? Were you alone in that appeal?
No, no, I was not alone. In fact, it was a beginning of the what I call democratic movement, and the again I describe it in my book on in the chapter on the 60s and 70s, and one of the spokesmen of that, which became a political movement, was Andrei Sakharov, who
Hmm.
wrote a famous book well, he was ostracized and he was a dissident and he was harassed by the KGB and all that stuff. But he wrote a book, which is called Our Country, Our World, which was earth-shattering because it was like a platform for many people to follow, and many did, and in the end they did win because they came to power with the collapse of the Soviet Union. The idea was um, of the com socialism and capitalism merging. Uh,
Interesting.
and in fact, this is what actually happened. I mean, France is a socialist country from that point of view. Medical services are almost free. Education is free, including universities. There's very, very serious social support for mothers and for children and for this and that. I mean, it's extraordinary, strong system, by far more and better than in the United States. Same thing in Germany and until recently in Britain. Now they're running out of money and they're thinking of curtailing some of these programs. But the idea is that the democratic government purpose of existence is to make life better for everyone, for all the people, and not just for the rich. You're not alone. In America, there's this philosophy, tough individualism. You have to make it, you shouldn't rely on anybody but yourself. Not like that in Europe. In France and in Germany, where I lived in both places, and I speak both French and German. No, in Germany, there's a Sozialamt. There's an office where you can come and say, I'm in trouble. I need money. My mother is in the hospital and I have nothing to live on, and they'll give it to you. In other words, the government exists to help people. And that is exactly what Sakharov was. In Russia, also, there was a Soviet Union. There was free education. There was free this.
Right.
There was no political freedom. And there was no private enterprise. So Sakharov's idea is that Russia should reform in getting market economics in addition to its social services, plus democracy. And that idea became the dominant one in the 1970s and 80s. And that leads me to the next point, which is that, again, I describe it in my book. In the West, people somehow think that the Soviet Union collapsed because communism collapsed. No, 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 no. This is completely wrong.
Yeah.
Nothing collapsed. The Communist Party collapsed because the majority of educated people stopped believing in this kind of bureaucratic, dictatorial, KGB type socialism. Instead, they wanted mixed economy, democracy, keeping as they would call socialist achievements of the Soviet system, plus friendship with the West, openness to the West. They really believed in one European home from Lisbon to Vladivostok. They really liked the United States. The US was seen as a friend. And I always say it in many of my interviews, Soviet people loved America. Why? Because America helped in tremendous ways to win World War II. And when I spoke to many, many veterans in the 60s, they would say, I know whose can of food I was eating in the trench, and understanding